Every year, 32 NFL teams kick off their season with the vision of Vince Lombardi's trophy dancing in their heads. And they go through the season, and ultimately, 31 teams end up going home disappointed. And whether you end up with the worst record in the National Football League or you make it all the way to the Super Bowl and ultimately lose, the fact of the matter is your season is a disappointment no matter how much anybody wants to put the positive spin on it, no matter how much anybody wants to twist it. There's one winner and there's 31 losers. And it's just that simple. You don't play to boost confidence. You don't play to sit there and build momentum for the next season. At the end of the day, the name of the game is winning a championship. And every season that you don't win a championship is a lost opportunity. And at the end of the day, the Seattle Seahawks, the Super Bowl 48 champions, who came into this season with a lot of expectations that they very well could be the first team since the New England Patriots of a decade ago in 2003 and 2004 to repeat. A lot of those expectations almost became reality. They almost became fulfilled. And the Seattle Seahawks came this close to achieving history, this close to establishing themselves as the new dynasty for the NFL for the next 8 to 10 years. However, at the end of the day, no matter how much you want to spin it, no matter how much you want to twist it, no matter how positive you want to look at things, at the end of the day, the Seahawks got very close and yet so far away. And just like 30 other teams, just like them, they ultimately went home losers. And it's funny when you look at the Seattle Seahawks because a lot of the things were pointing in their direction. As difficult as it is to repeat in the NFL as a Super Bowl champion, they had a lot of things going in their favor. They had a lot of positive things pointing to the fact that they could get it done. They could be different, and they damn near almost did. But early on in the season, in 2014, it didn't look like the Seahawks were going to get back to that level. This was a team that started off 7-4. The Legion of Boom wasn't necessarily booming. That offense was definitely scuffling and struggling. You had that 7-4 start that was capped off with that bad loss to the Kansas City Chiefs, where the defense didn't look great against a mediocre Chiefs offense, and that offense most certainly of the Seahawks didn't do much of anything. You were wondering, are the Seahawks at that point in time at 7-4? You realistically are even wondering in the NFC whether or not this team is going to make the playoffs, let alone get home field advantage throughout the playoffs and go on to the Super Bowl and come this close to winning Super Bowl 49. But that's exactly what the Seahawks did. A lot of credit to that coaching staff and to that roster to be able to turn things around the way they did, winning their last 5 games of the regular season, going 12-4, winning the NFC West, and not only that, getting home field advantage throughout the playoffs. Then going into the playoffs and defending their home turf, which was so important to them last year and it proved to be again this year. That home field advantage was, at least it seems like, a bit of a difference. They matched up well against the Panthers and took care of business against them in the divisional round, and then somehow, some way, found a way to win a game that they frankly flat out should have lost against the Green Bay Packers in the championship game. Those are the type of games that you say, yeah, the Packers lost it in some ways, but the Seahawks also won it. Good teams, championship teams, win games they had no business winning. They win games they should lose. And the Seattle Seahawks, at the end of the day, are champions. And in that NFC Championship game, when so many things were going so poorly, especially in the first half, both offensively and defensively, frankly, they found a way to get the job done. They found a way to play 60-plus minutes of football, and they found a way to win the NFC Championship and go on to Super Bowl 49. And, you know, the whole sad irony about Super Bowl 49 is that a lot of things pointed to the Seahawks being able to repeat. And, you know, we could talk about that atrociously terrible play call, that decision, 2nd and goal with under a minute to go on New England's 1-yard line. Why in the hell are you lining up a shotgun and throwing a pass there? And that should be questioned. That should be not, because that was terrible. That was a clear-cut example of overthinking it. You're talking about putting the ball in Russell Wilson's hands to throw a slant pass to a freaking Ricardo Lockett. It's not like you were throwing the ball to Jerry Rice or somebody like that. You were throwing it to Ricardo Lockett. You have Marshawn Lynch, beast mode, the most physically imposing and dominant running back in the National Football League, and on 2nd and goal at the 1-yard line, just after Marshawn Lynch has dominated the Patriots defense throughout the entire game, just after on 1st and goal at the 5, he rushes for 4 yards, damn near gets in the end zone there. You outthink yourself and you line up at the shotgun and telegraph that you're going to throw a quick slant pass. That's just dumb. And what makes that so dumb is not only the fact that they had beast mode, not only the fact that they had Russell Wilson who could also run himself, so maybe you line up in a regular formation and you run a bootleg. is the fact that for all intents and purposes, you don't even know if the New England Patriots are just going to let you score there. The Patriots have a history. They've done that before. Who's to say they wouldn't have done that again? You've got to at least find out on second down. You've got 3 downs to get 1 yard. You've got 3 downs to score a touchdown. You've got 3 downs to possibly win the Super Bowl. And that's the decision you make, and that's the play call you make. Therefore, taking the decision out of the New England Patriots' hands, one of the most idiotic play calls in the history of play calling in professional football or any sport that I have ever seen. And the ironic thing about it is when you look at that Super Bowl, you look at the fact that the narrative after the first half could have been the great coaching job by the coaching staff of the Seattle Seahawks and Pete Carroll in particular, especially late in that first half, where the Patriots flat out for most of that first half had outplayed the Seahawks, and maybe the Patriots should have been up even more than what they were. But here are the Seahawks. It's 14-7. They're hanging around. They're battling. It's still a ball game. And where a lot of teams deep in their own territory with that little time left to go in the first half would have just taken a knee and headed to the locker room, the Seahawks were on the attack. They went into their 2-minute drill, and with 6 seconds to go, you not only had that tremendously smart decision to try and go for it and get some points there, but now 6 seconds, you make this critical call at this critical juncture of the game, and you make the right call. You trust your franchise quarterback, Russell Wilson, to make the right decision, make a big play, and that's what happens. A little stop, back shoulder fade to Chris Matthews, and all of a sudden the game is tied, and the Seahawks have all of the momentum, and you saw that in the third quarter as they jumped out to a 10-point lead. I mean, the narrative in a lot of ways could have been the great coaching of Pete Carroll and the aggressiveness of that Seattle Seahawks team and how much they blew out the Patriots in the second half. And for a lot of intents and purposes, that's what should have happened. But I think what you saw in the fourth quarter was a real representation of some of the problems of the Seattle Seahawks all throughout 2014 that ultimately caught up with them in the biggest of big games. You're talking about a defense that, while first in points allowed in the league and first in yards allowed in the league, and by good margins in both categories, this was a defense that was not as good as it was in 2013, and you could see that with your eyes. The statistics don't always tell the whole story, and that was clearly the case with the Legion of Boom defense in 2014. They struggled to generate the same type of pass rush they did the previous year. They struggled against teams that could spread them out with 3 and 4 wide receiver sets, as the New England Patriots could do. The Seahawks really struggled to match up with that. This was not a defense that was able to impose their physical will as much in 2014 quite as they did in 2013. They weren't quite the same intimidating force. So statistically, they were great, but it wasn't the same. And you saw that in the fourth quarter as Brady was able to lead his team to 2 touchdown drives in the fourth quarter against this great, vaunted, classic Seahawks defense. And then offensively, yes, they were top 10 in the league in points scored. They were 9th in the league in total yards. But a very imbalanced offensive attack that lacked explosive, big-time playmakers. How much of a pain in the ass did Percy Harvin have to be for them to want to trade him early on in the 2014 season? Because they traded away, even though they struggled to figure out how he would fit in the offense early in 2014, they traded away the one guy that could get any type of separation. They traded away the one guy that could make any type of consistent threat at all to opposing secondary. See, they traded away the one versatile weapon they had in the passing game. And it showed at times throughout the season. It most certainly showed in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl. Because, yes, this was the best rushing team by a margin in the National Football League, a big part of their identity. But at times, they really struggled to move the ball through the air with any type of consistency, making them very one-dimensional on offense. If you could do anything to contain that one dimension, there was no other dimension that you really had to worry about with the Seahawks. And again, in the fourth quarter, where the Seahawks team really needed to put points on the board to bury the Patriots and maybe steamroll them, they just weren't able to get the job done. And they put the ball back in the hands of Brady and that Patriots offense too quickly, and you saw what happened. With that said, though, you still have to feel good about the Seattle Seahawks long term. This is a team that won Super Bowl 48, came this close to winning Super Bowl 49. And has a lot of the pieces in place to suggest that not only could they make a run next year, but they could make several runs for several years to come. Now, assuming they're going to get the Russell Wilson contract extension done this offseason, we all know that's probably going to happen, and it needs to happen. They'll have their franchise quarterback in place, and he will end up being an elite quarterback, and he will end up being one of the big flag-bearing stars for the National Football League for the next decade. There's no question about that. But he does need to step up as a passer, be more consistent as a passer. They need to give him some help. But while he makes some incredibly beautiful throws, there are times where you just sit there and look at Russell Wilson as a passer, and it does seem that he's somewhat limited. But getting Russell Wilson in the mix long term gives you identity and gives him some understanding that this is going to be his team, and lets the Seahawks know that they need to do more to get more out of him. We'll see what happens with Marshawn Lynch and him and his contract situation. Are they going to bring back beast mode? If they are they going to have him around long term? While he's getting up there in age a little bit for the running back position, this is still a guy you have to envision could be a force in the league for the next few years to come. But most importantly of all, the identity of that team at the end of the day is on the defensive side of the ball. And when you look at that Seahawks defense, you see a team with a lot of continuity and also a lot of youth. This is a team that is very young on that side of the ball. And this is a team that has a lot of its key pieces, for the most part, locked up for a long time. When you look at some of their biggest stars, like in the secondary, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor, they're all young, and they're all locked up to long-term contracts. You look at that linebacking core, Bobby Wagner, Bruce Irvin, KJ Wright, all of those guys you would have to think are going to be there for many years to come, and they're all young. You look at that defensive line, in particular defensive ends, Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill. While not as young as some of the other guys on the defense, still young enough to play at a decent level for a few years to come, and they're both locked up long term. This is a team that isn't going to have a lot of the moving parts in this offseason like other Super Bowl winners or losers would. Frankly, they'll have more moving parts last year than what they will end up with this year. This is a team that's going to be returning a lot of its core team that has been to back-to-back Super Bowls. This is a team that's going to have a lot of continuity and a lot of experience together and a lot of understanding of what roles everybody has to play, in particular on the defensive side of the ball. And that's huge, and that's critical. Absolutely critical. This is a scary Seahawks team to think about in the long term, assuming that they can rebound from this loss. Because this is a type of loss that could bury an organization for years. This is a type of loss that could ruin a quarterback like a Russell Wilson. This is a loss that could kill a lot of the steam and the confidence of a head coach like a Pete Carroll and an organization as a whole. What do they need to do to ensure that that doesn't happen? While they're a team that has a lot of youth and a lot of depth in different areas, they do, for all of the great things that they have some major glaring weaknesses that must be addressed in this offseason. First and foremost, they have to get better at the skill positions outside on offense. You've got your top 3 wide receivers are all undrafted players. Doug Baldwin, Jermaine Kearse, Ricardo Lockett. You're only going to do so much with those 3 guys as your top 3 wide receivers. Nice stories, nice players, but not big-time impact difference makers that you really want to have your young quarterback having to rely upon for the next 8 to 10 years. They must get a big-time physical red zone target. They must get a true #1 type of wide receiver. They need to get bigger. They need to get more physical. They need to find guys that can more consistently generate separation at the National Football League level than what Baldwin, Kearse, and Lockett can do. Then they need to find that tight end that can really be a difference maker over the middle, be that great intermediate target for a Russell Wilson to be able to lean on and go to. While the Seahawks are in a situation where you say they could draft best player available, not in their case. Because they could draft best player available all they want and build up their depth, in certain areas. But they must address these needs if they expect to do anything going forward. If they want to improve and they want to grow and they want to be special and they want to win 3 Super Bowls in the next 5-6 years, then they must address these deficiency areas. And it's not just on offense, on defense too. You see the lack of depth in the secondary, namely at the corner position. Once you get past Sherman and to a lesser degree Maxwell, they really don't have much. Jeremy Lane, inconsistent. Harold Simon, you're playing him in the slot, you're playing him out of position. They need to get better at that corner position. They need to find guys in particular that can match up better in nickel and dime situations against both slot receivers and those big physical tight ends. And they need to get some depth on that defensive line, You're lining up Michael Bennett a lot inside, and while that's a nice matchup to have, what it's suggesting is that you don't have a lot of depth at the defensive tackle. And once they lost Jordan Hill to an injury late in the year, you could really see that. This is a team that needs to get better and more athletic up front. The losses of guys like Red Bryant and Chris Clemens really showed as the season went along. They just weren't the same on that defensive front. And the sack totals and the lack of the same type of consistent, dominant pass rush and pressure caused on opposing quarterbacks showed that. This is a really good Seahawks team. They came really, really close to making history. And this is a team that could very well be a force for many years to come and could be the standard-bearer franchise for the next 5 to 7 years. But they must address these weakness areas. They must get better at their key deficiencies. Otherwise, they are going to be a team that will maybe make the playoffs in 2015 but bow out early and not get anywhere close to the same level they have the previous 2 seasons.